Thank you, Cian Corley. Good afternoon, Minister, and may I take this opportunity to say thank you for all the work you've done over the years, and I'll be sorry to see you go, and all the best in the future. All the talk of estimates, again, it's an 96-page document, which, yes, we received quite late yesterday. But given that we're in a predicament and that we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're not going to be able to debate it, the regional group and myself will be in a position to which we will support it. But there are some anomalies that I absolutely want to address today, and I think that particularly your department, Minister, Employment and Social Protection, there are two significant issues that arise because of our duty as legislators. And what I don't like is the reference to, the working age, because it has significantly marginalised those over 66. Who, on one hand, if they had an employer who signed up to the temporary wage scheme and decided to pay them, now they were all of a sudden part of the working age and were entitled to be paid. But if they were depending on the COVID payment or the pandemic unemployment payment, they were no longer entitled to it because of their age. Now, I have had significant contact with people, not just in my own constituency, but this is a national issue. And given the estimates that we received last night, very much less than 1% of the population of social welfare recipients receive a Christmas bonus over the age of 66. Less than 1%. And I think, therefore, there's even less than that again who should be recompensed in some way, that they were working in order to supplement the pension that they receive. And let's face it here, not too many people are able to survive at 66 on €248 a week. That's assuming they're in receipt of it, because there's a large cohort of people who were self-employed and for whatever reason didn't have a pension or weren't eligible for the state pension, who have no income. And there are many who are now in dire straits and moving into the poverty trap. And I do believe that we, as legislators, owe them a duty to keep them out of that poverty trap. And what I'm asking the Minister today is that I have a particular gentleman who has spoken to me and is working. He's 68 years old. And he has continued to work because his marriage broke up when he was 62 years old and had to borrow money in which to recompense his wife for the separation of marriage. And I think that's something, and he has no means in which to pay. This is not a mortgage, this is a loan that he has tried to have the payments set aside for a period of time. That hasn't worked for him, and he is now out of a job, living on €248 and no means of savings in which to pay his loans. And I think we have a duty of care to that gentleman, and that I'm asking you that under, whether it be the supplementary welfare provision or not, but to make available a lump sum payment. I'm asking you now, Minister, to undertake to do this for those over 66 that had been in employment and were excluded from the PUP payment. That's one question. And I think the other thing that I'd like you to address, as you mentioned yourself, you expect an increase in the back-to-school allowance uptake. Well, the anomaly that's created actually will probably mean that there may be an increase on those applying, but there will certainly be an increase on those who are going to get it. And I'll tell you why. Though if you have a family of a mother and father who are both in receive the PUP payment of €350 each, that's the threshold beyond what is required for a family with 3 children. It is actually €674, and what they would receive is €825. But because they will be €26 over the threshold, they will receive nothing. However, on the other hand, if you're a couple receiving the payment of €700, you're both receiving it, and you have 4 children, because of €11, you will actually be able to receive €1,000. So the differential in the two families is only €37. One will get nothing and one will get €1,000. And I really want to see that anomaly addressed before people start to apply, because the applications generally open on the 1st of June, and I think it's paramount that nobody is beset in September with the fear of not being able to afford to send their children back to school. And you can see that this is meaningless when it comes to income. So for those who think, that there's going to be a clawback, as Gary said, I would hate to think that this government is going to give with one hand and take back with the other to the most vulnerable in our society. And it may well be the case that parents of those children will not be able to get back to work if we do not get our childcare system in order. So I would really, really appreciate that is addressed in the short period of time which we have, particularly as applications will open, and many, many parents nationally, not just in Wexford, but nationally, will be very upset by the fact that they're beset with this worry. So I'd ask that be clarified as soon as possible. The other clarity I think that is essential for people, it does surround arrears, and we have had many, many people on to us who applied for the payment, but for whatever reason, due to whether they applied through the post or whether they applied on the internet, they didn't receive their payment, in some instances 6-7 weeks into the COVID payment. And I think now is the time that we need clarity on that. I'd appreciate that it can't be addressed quickly, but neither did they get recompense from the social welfare officer, which means that they are significantly, not everybody has received it, and if you were 7 weeks without money, it has put them significantly in a dire position. The other thing I would ask is that we don't have any clarity in relation to whether or not redundancies will either be the 31st of May will continue to be a cap on the redundancies, or whether it's going to be continued further down the line. And I think for employers and employees, it's a very significant issue, and it needs to be clarified as to where they stand, whether they can claim the redundancy, whether the employer has to pay it. But what I would be suggesting is that in the time that we're in, and which is unprecedented, that to safeguard jobs of those who won't be made redundant within sectors who will obviously have to make some people redundant, I think it's significant, and I think the government should consider that if redundancy is an issue, that it is paid out of the insolvency fund, regardless, because all we're going to serve to do is put the employer, unless there are huge amounts of money, which in the small medium enterprise sector there aren't, I can assure you. But I would ask you to consider that the insolvency fund be the basis of which redundancies are paid. Thank you, Minister. Thank you,
So to just answer the direct questions that you asked, first of all, I'm not sure that it's accurate to say that only 1% of our pensioners get a Christmas bonus. I don't. They all do. So,
they're less than 1% of the social welfare recipients.
They're actually not. So there's some 585,000 pensioners in the country, and we pay weekly payments to about 1.2 million. But either way, I'll come back to you with a written answer to that, if that's okay with you, so you can have it. Again, the next three things that you've asked me, with the exception of arrears, whilst they might be really nice asks, the reason I'd have to say no to is because they all require changes in legislation, and unfortunately not only do I not have the ability to draft legislation at the moment, I don't think we have, as a House or two Houses, have the ability to actually even pass it. And so on that basis, I'm going to have to say to you that the governing rules for the Back to Education allowance that exist currently are the ones that are going to be adjudicated under from the 1st of June, when the applications open, right up until the end of September. So unless we change the legislation between now and September, I don't think the rules can be any different. And with regard to the thresholds, again, unfortunately, there are always cliff edges. There are thresholds that are set that the House determined when we established the legislation that do always penalise people that might be just a few quid over or a few quid under. But again, maybe that's something I would encourage you to have a look at, maybe with the view to bringing forward some legislation in the future. The redundancies issues that you've asked for, I have a memo going to Cabinet tomorrow, and so I'll make the announcement therefore after, if I get government approval from it. And with regard to the arrears, and I think some other members mentioned the arrears too, Deputy Brady, you did too. The arrears and the calculation of the arrears is exactly the same process for us as would be sitting down, socially distanced with a couple or a person that's on the PUP to do a whole JB application. And so the establishment of the arrears is a process and a staff and a time-consuming process. And so given that we don't have the staff, and we want to, when we do have the staff, redeploy them to do other stuff in activation for us, we're writing an IT script and it's just taken a little bit longer than we'd anticipated. But we would hope in the next number of weeks to have that IT script that can go through the algorithms of all of our wonderful system to be able to pull out the data of exactly how many people are owed how much and to be able to issue to them in the meantime. But one